Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm thrilled to be back for another episode to talk some Terps. But before I dive into everything going on in College Park, just a reminder that this show is on YouTube and part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network. So if you love local basketball, then you gotta go to youtube.com/@Department of Hoops and check out everything we have going on there. There's great Wizards coverage. There's great mid-major basketball coverage. And of course, this show is hosted there as well, talking Terps all year long. So make sure you go to youtube.com/Department of Hoops and check it all out. If you're a local basketball fan, you're gonna love the Department of Hoops. So of course, today I am gonna be diving into the Sweet 16 matchup that Maryland has on Thursday with Florida. Unfortunately, I'm going to be talking about the latest in the Kevin Willard situation. That Villanova job is still open, and the speculation continues to grow about whether he will be Maryland's coach next year or if he's going to be headed up to Philly. So I wasn't hoping to talk about that today, but that is something that has to be discussed given the roar it's grown to over the course of the last week. But where I want to start today is with a few leftovers from that unbelievable second-round buzzer-beating win against Colorado State. I went live right after the game for about an hour, breaking down everything, talking about Derek Queen's shot, the emotion of the moment, what that shot meant for the program. The chat was going crazy. It was awesome. It was a great time, and it felt like a moment that we're going to remember forever as Maryland fans. But with a couple days to really reflect and look back at that moment in that game and everything that came out of it, I wanted to revisit a couple things that some of which I didn't really feel like I got to address on Sunday night in the emotion of that moment, and some things that I might have touched on, but I want to go a little bit deeper on. So the first thing I do want to talk about is something I didn't talk about at all on Sunday night. In fact, I didn't know it was even a point of discussion until about, midnight on Sunday night after I had finished the live reaction show, after I had done some social media stuff, after I had made some phone calls, talked to some people that I wanted to talk to about the game. I had no idea until I logged on to Twitter at about midnight that people were talking about whether Derek Queen traveled or not on that game-winning shot. And my opinion on the situation is this: who cares? I don't care whether he traveled, whether he didn't travel. I don't care if you want to slow it down frame by frame to the tiniest fraction of a second and say, hey, this proves that he traveled, or this proves that he didn't travel. To me, in real time, never thought once that it was a travel. Never crossed my mind that it might be a travel. But I get it to some extent, looking back at the replay, that it looked like he took 3 steps. I thought Gene Steratore on CBS gave a really nice explanation of why it wasn't a travel, but it never once crossed my mind that it might be a travel. And after seeing the discourse and the back and forth and all these people so upset that it was a travel and that should have been called and Colorado State got screwed, I say, who cares? Who cares? That's basketball. That's life. That's sports. Calls happen all the time. Let's just operate under the premise for 1 second that it was a travel, which I don't think anybody can definitively say it was, but let's just operate under that premise for 1 second that it was a travel and it was a missed call. It happens. It happened in that game. I talked about this on the postgame. Nick Clifford, Colorado State's best player, drilled Jordan Geronimo in the head with an elbow at the end of the first half. The officials didn't even go to the monitor on it, much less call a personal foul. There's a lot of people out there that thought that could have easily been a flagrant 1, if not a flagrant 2. Officials never even looked at it. I thought that was asinine. I thought that was crazy that the officials didn't even go to the monitor for what was very clear contact to the head. That was a huge missed call. It's possible that Colorado State would have been without their best player for the rest of the game if the refs make that call. But guess what? They didn't make the call. They didn't see it. They didn't make the call. It was a missed call. Life goes on. It happens. It happens every day in sports. Duke in 2001 won a national championship, and in the Final Four, in both games, there were calls that many neutral observers would say were iffy. There was some calls in that Maryland game in the second half, particularly one foul on Lonnie Baxter that I clearly remember. There were some calls in that Arizona national championship game that people, not just Maryland fans, not just Arizona fans, not just Duke haters, would say, that wasn't a great call. Duke's not giving the national title back, and Maryland's not giving this win back. It's not like anybody's going to come stand on the court in San Francisco on Thursday and say, no, Maryland, you can't take the court. We're going to give it to Colorado State. They rightfully won the game. Because actually, when we froze it down and isolated it frame by frame by frame by frame, Derek Queen traveled. And that's not going to happen. That's not how this works. So maybe it was a travel. Maybe it wasn't a travel. I haven't seen anything definitively to show me that it was a travel. Like I said, I thought Gene Steratore on CBS gave a really nice explanation of why he didn't think it was a travel, but it never once crossed my mind that it was a travel. I had no idea that was the major discourse going on Sunday night and a big part of the day into Monday. And at the end of the day, I say, who cares? Maryland won the game. They're going to play Florida on Thursday in the Sweet 16. Colorado State is not, and that's the end of the story. So that's my thought on Travelgate there. Now let's get back to a better topic, a more fun topic. One I think you're going to enjoy listening to and talking about much more. I know I am. Maryland. This Maryland team has shown such composure, such confidence, such a sense of calm all season long. And I felt like that was exhibited in spades on Sunday night. That was a game that this team did not have their A game. They did not have their best. But every time Maryland this season has been faced with adversity, whether it's any of the 4 last-second shots that they've lost on over the past 6 weeks here. And by the way, Maryland now in their last 20 games, 16-4 over their last 20 games. The 4 losses, the Nick Martinelli buzzer beater at Northwestern, the Bruce Thornton banked in 3 at Ohio State, the Trey Holloman half-court shot at Michigan State, and the Trey Donaldson shot where he drove the length of the floor to knock Maryland out in the Big Ten tournament semifinals. Those are the 4 losses. Those games, those 4 losses have come by a combined 9 points. But Maryland, throughout this season, every time they are faced with adversity, they bounce back. They respond. After each of those losses, those aforementioned losses, Maryland's gone on a winning streak. After Northwestern, they won 4 in a row. After Ohio State, they won 4 in a row. After Michigan State, they won 4 in a row. And after Michigan, they've now won 2 in a row in the NCAA tournament. This Maryland team has been doing it all year long, so we shouldn't really be surprised. This is a team that never panics. There's a team that has this calm demeanor. It's a team that plays with great confidence and composure, and even in games we see it. I think it's really easy to forget in that Michigan State game, Maryland had to go on a 7-0 run late to tie it, to give themselves a chance to win it. There were a lot of people at Xfinity Center that night who were walking out of that arena, or at least were in the concourse by the time that Trey Holloman drilled that half-court shot. Because Maryland looked like they were done and dusted in that game. And Maryland had to go on a late 7-0 run with about 2 minutes left to tie that ball game up, get it back with a chance to hit a game-winning shot. Of course, they couldn't do it. Michigan State does. But that game looked over. And Maryland was able to stay calm, stay composed, continue playing with confidence, and find a way to get back in that ball game and tie it up. So it's not just after a loss, but it's even within these games. Maryland has shown this unbelievable ability to stay calm, to stay composed, and to stay confident and find a way to win. I talked about it. I guess it must have been after that Michigan game. I had talked about it, where there was so much talk about, well, can Maryland win close games? Is this a real problem for them? Are they not good enough to win close games? And I said, look, this is a team that actually has a winning record in games decided by single-digit points. It's just that the losses have been so painful. They've been so visceral. They're these last-second shots, and they seem like they're going to win, and it's just so visceral that it feels like, oh, Maryland can't possibly win these close games. But the actual numbers show that Maryland actually won games decided by less than 10 points more than they lost them, and then add another one to the ledger there against Colorado State. But what we saw on Sunday night, again, was a team that I didn't think played great, I didn't think had their A game, but found a way to win because they were able to stay calm, composed, and confident. This is a resilient group, and we saw that all night long on Sunday, and the plays that stand out in that game are plays that I talked about after the game, and a couple of them I think are going to get lost to history. The Derek Queen shot certainly isn't, but it's Jacoby Gillespie getting a steal after Maryland had missed a shot with just a couple minutes left, down 5. Jacoby Gillespie gets a steal, ends up hitting a 3 to cut it to 2. Then he gets out in transition going the other way, dishes to Rodney Rice for a game-tying layup. Those are things that are really important. I thought that was a turning point in that game because Maryland, at that point, it didn't look like they had much going for him. Jacoby Gillespie made a big play because he stayed calm, composed, and confident. Julian Reese, I talked about this one a lot on Sunday night, but Julian Reese grabbing what can only be described as a man's rebound with 22 seconds left, an offensive rebound nonetheless, an area where Maryland had not done well all night, grabbing a big offensive rebound, getting fouled, stepping up and calmly making 2 free throws. Again, calm, composed, confident. And then, of course, what can you say about Derek Queen? Derek Queen in the huddle says, give me the MF ball. Kevin Willard, and I've listened to him talk about this so much this week. He said he likes to get a sense for who really wants the ball. And Derek Queen said, give me the MF ball. He had that confidence. You know why he had the confidence, because he's from Baltimore. That's why. But he was calm, he was composed, and he was confident. He wanted the ball. He wanted to take that shot. And, of course, he drilled it. So when I think about the traits of this Maryland basketball team, I can name a million things from a basketball perspective, right? They have great size inside. They have great shooters. They switch defenses. They make life really hard on the defensive end with how they switch and how they switch their defenses up between that matchup zone and man-to-man. They're really good at getting in the passing lanes. But when I think about the characteristics of this team that are not necessarily just basketball skills, it's calm, composed, and it's confident. And on Sunday night, that's what it took when they didn't have their A game to beat a really, really good basketball team. And I think that's another thing that's getting a little bit lost here, is that this Colorado State team is a hell of a basketball team. You shouldn't walk away from that win over Colorado State being like, man, Maryland barely escaped against the Mountain West team that was a 13 seed. No. This Colorado State team, the last time they lost before Maryland beat them on Sunday night was February 11th. They were on an 11-game winning streak. And over the course of that 11-game winning streak, they had shot 46% from 3, and they had the best effective field goal percentage in the country. This team was scorching hot. It was confident. They have great players. Nick Clifford, you saw it on Sunday night. He is an NBA guy. He's shooting up those draft boards. They have talent. And this was a great win. For Maryland to beat a team like that, especially given the fact that Maryland didn't play their best, to me, I walk away thinking, they barely escaped. They got to fix some things. I come away thinking that is what March is all about. Finding ways to win against teams that are really good, really confident, really hot. And that's exactly what Colorado State was. I'm telling you right now, if you switch Colorado State's name, if you put a different name on their jerseys and different colors on, if you call them Mississippi State, if you call them Iowa State, if you put them in a power league, if you change the names on the front of their jerseys and their colors, people would have been talking about them as a dark horse Final Four contender the way they had played over the last 6 weeks. They hadn't lost since February 11th. That's a confident team. That's a good team. And that's a team that really battled Maryland all night long. So I don't care what their seed was. I don't care what conference they play in. I care that I saw it. They dismantled Memphis in the second half of that game. They were way better than Memphis in the second half of that basketball game. They took it to Memphis. They ended up winning the game by 8 points. But I think if you just watch that game, you could see that Colorado State was the better team, especially in the second half, where they scored 47 points. They scored 47 points on Memphis in the second half of that ball game. So I think that's getting lost, just how good that Colorado State team was and how impressive it is that Maryland was ultimately able to come away with a win. And now the last thing I want to talk about as it relates to that Colorado State game is just, I started reflecting on this late Sunday night. And it was as I saw these scenes come out from College Park at bars where people were watching the game, the reaction of people going nuts, celebrating as a community, people just at home with family, with friends, celebrating and sharing this moment. And it really got me thinking because I, of course, was lucky enough. I am extraordinarily lucky that I grew up as a Maryland fan. I was around for the golden era of Maryland basketball. I mean, I remember all of it. And I'm even more lucky because I was born into a family that really loves Maryland basketball and really cared about Maryland basketball. And we went to a lot of games, and we went to a lot of big games. We went to a lot of NCAA tournament games, went to Final Four games, went to ACC tournaments. I was really lucky that I had the opportunity to do that, of course, and that I was around for that era. There's a lot of people that are Maryland fans now, diehard Maryland fans now, that haven't enjoyed any of that success. I mean, I have friends. I started at Maryland in fall 07. Fall 2007. That's 18 years ago, nearly 18 years ago now. But I have friends who didn't grow up Maryland fans, who were from out of state, decided to go to Maryland for school, and developed a lifelong bond with the school and the team, right? It became big fans, like many people do when they go away to college, and then they fall in love with that university and their sports teams. And I have friends who have been Maryland fans, diehard Maryland fans, for 18 years, that really hadn't had a moment like that. They didn't have the Drew Nicholas shot. They didn't see Maryland win the 2004 ACC tournament. They didn't see him win the national championship in 2002. They didn't have these moments. Yeah, there'd been smaller moments, but nothing compares to the postseason. Nothing compares to the NCAA tournament. Nothing compares to win or go home. And there are so many Maryland fans who are even now in their mid-30s that have not had these moments. There's a way younger generation that definitely hasn't had these moments at the stage that we saw on Sunday night. And I think this is just an impactful moment for Maryland fans. I think this is certainly a moment that Maryland fans will never forget. But it's not just because Derek Queen hit the shot. It's because they have never had the reason to celebrate communally like that. You know, a lot of people don't really go out to bars and watch parties for a Wednesday night conference game against Iowa. It's March. Unfortunately, this is becoming a 3-week sport. It's a March sport at this point, unless you are an absolute diehard. And look, I love it. I love it all. I love November through April. I love this sport. But for 99% of the sports viewing public, this is a March sport. And this is a moment where everybody who has any rooting interest in Maryland was into the Terps. People were out. People had a reason to get together and watch this game. I saw people in my neighborhood here wearing Terps gear, or I was wearing Terps gear, and they would say to me, "Go Terps," in the lead up to this game and the lead up to this weekend. And it had this moment where things were building. There's excitement rising. And then you have that shot, and everybody was able to celebrate. And it's just a very meaningful moment for a fan base that has not had that in a very, very long time. And people within the fan base who have never had it to this extent. So I realize how lucky I am that I saw some of these golden years. But I also acknowledge and realize there's a lot of diehard, hardcore Maryland fans who've now been fans a really long time. 15 years, 18 years, 20 years, who have never had these marquee moments like we saw on Sunday night. And that's a really, really meaningful thing. All right, enough looking in the rear view. Let's look ahead, because Maryland is a huge game. I did a whole segment earlier this season about the most anticipated games in the post-Gary Williams era. Well, this one against Florida on Thursday night at the Chase Center in San Francisco has got to be right up there with any of them, because Maryland still has Final Four dreams. Maryland still has national championship dreams. They are all alive. But to continue, they're going to have to beat the number 1 seed in the West region, the Florida Gators. Right now, Florida is a 6.5-point favorite in this one, and they are one of the favorites to win the entire NCAA tournament. Duke is the favorite kind of across all the books, but Florida right there behind them. This is a legit national championship team. Now, of course, the winner of this game will play whoever wins the other Sweet 16 matchup in the region. That's number 3 Texas Tech versus number 10 Arkansas. Texas Tech, a 5.5-point favorite in that one. But let's focus on those Florida Gators and what they do how they got here and what makes them such a challenge. And Florida had a great season, 27-4. They finished second in the SEC, and they won the SEC tournament. And along the way in that tournament, they beat 3 NCAA tournament teams. Missouri, who would end up being a number 6 seed in the NCAA tournament. Alabama, who would end up being a 2 seed and is still alive. They have a matchup with BYU. Tennessee, who would end up being a 2 seed. They're still alive. They have a Sweet 16 matchup with Kentucky. They beat some really good teams along the way to win that conference championship. They've won 8 in a row. They've won 14 of their last 15, and their only loss was a road game in Athens, where Alex Condon, their big man, was making his return from an ankle injury. So that's their only loss in the last 15 games. Now, before I get to what they do really well and how they've achieved such success, this has been a strange year for Florida because there's been some off-the-court issues with their coaching staff. Their head coach, Todd Golden, was under a Title IX investigation that was opened in the fall by the university. That has since been closed due to a lack of evidence. So that investigation into Golden has been closed. He did not miss any time due to those allegations and that investigation, but it was something that was open and looming over the program. Now, one of their assistant coaches, Taurine Green, also has an open Title IX investigation into him. That was opened in January, and he has not missed time. That is a current, ongoing, open Title IX investigation into one of the assistant coaches, Taurine Green. He's a guy who was on both the 06 and 07 national championships at Florida as a player. So this is a program that, despite all of its on-court success this season, has had some off-the-court things swirling around it all season long. Now let's get to what they do so well on the court. Because when you watch this team play, it's hard to find a true fatal flaw. It's hard to find an obvious weakness with them. They're number 3 in KenPom right now. They're number 2 in offensive rating. They're number 11 in defensive rating. When I watch them, I think this team is deep. They play 10 guys that are averaging double-digit minutes. There's 4 guys on this team who are all double-digit scorers. That's Walter Clayton, their point guard. He's a first-team All-American, first-team All-SEC guy. Elijah Martin, one of their other guards. Will Richard, their third guard. And Alex Condon, a big man from Australia who is an integral part of this team, third-team All-SEC. And they have 10 guys that play double-digit minutes. They are huge. They feature a 6'10 guy and a 6'11 guy in the front court. At 6'10, they have Ruben Shinyelu, and at 6'11, they have the aforementioned Condon. Both those guys are sophomores, but they are a really big front line. Honestly, they look more like a Big Ten front line than they do an SEC front line. They also have the ability to bring more size off the bench. They have 6'9 Thomas Hawk and 7'1 Micah Hanlogden, who he suffered a really bad injury in the SEC tournament final last season, breaking his leg. He missed a large part of this season, but he is back and a contributor for them. So with their 4 bigs, they can go 6'9, 6'10, 6'11, 7'1. They are a really big team, and they're a good offensive rebounding team, 5th nationally in offensive rebounding percentage, as you would expect for a team with that size. Now, they're not just big, but they're also fast. They're number 61 in tempo nationally, and they're second in the country in fast break points per game at 16.5. This team in some ways reminds me of a more talented, more offensively prolific version of Michigan State. Between their depth, their size, and how deadly they are in transition, they remind me a little bit of Michigan State in that way. I'm not saying it's necessarily a perfect comparison, but if you're looking for a team that you can kind of see some similarities with, it's Michigan State. Now, Michigan, when you compare them to Michigan State, they are a much better shooting team. Michigan State, that's their fatal flaw. That's their obvious fatal flaw, is they are not a good three-point shooting team. But like Michigan State, they're good on the offensive glass. Like Michigan State, they are big. They have size. Like Michigan State, they are absolutely deadly when it comes to the fast break. If you cannot stop them in transition, you're gonna have a long day. I said Florida's number 2 in the country in fast break points per game. Well, Michigan State's right behind them in number 3. So it's not a perfect comparison, but when I think about Big Ten teams that they might be similar to, Michigan State is the one that really jumps off the page at me. The other that I think about a little bit is Illinois, because Illinois at times will play this 5-out offense much like them. So Illinois is another one that I think about a little bit when I think about Michigan State. Florida is also a team that can win in a variety of ways. We've seen them win 80 possession shootouts against a team like Alabama and Tuscaloosa. They beat them 99-94, but we've also seen them grind it out a little bit. They won a 68 possession game against Tennessee in the SEC championship game. They won a 66 possession game against UConn in the second round. So this is not a team where you can say, like, okay, if we can just slow them down, if we play at a slower pace, we can beat them. They've shown they can do that. And certainly, I don't know that playing fast, that you're going to win a shootout against Florida. If anybody's equipped to do something like that, you would feel like it's Alabama. They're a team that they're built for that. That's what they want to do. They want to run and gun. They want to get up and down the court. They want to play fast. Well, they've had good success against Florida, or against Alabama, I should say, this season. They won a shootout against them in Tuscaloosa, and then they beat them again 104-82 in the SEC tournament. So this Florida team can win a variety of ways, and then they are a good shooting team. I made the Michigan State comparison, but they are a much better shooting team than Michigan State. As a team, they shoot just under 36% from beyond the arc, and all 3 of their starting guards shoot 35% or better from 3. They also have Alex Condon, who can step out there and make a 3 on occasion. So this is a team that you can't just pack it in like you can against the Michigan State, or try to against the Michigan State and say, hey, you're not getting to the lane, beat us from beyond the arc. No, Florida more than capable of beating you from beyond the arc. So this is a really challenging team. This is a team that I feel like is a true national championship contender. You know, I said it on the Sunday show. Sometimes there has to be 4 number 1 seeds, and that last number 4 seed is kind of That's not this year. That's not this Florida team. This is a very good Florida team. This is a well-rounded Florida team. This is a talented Florida team. Walter Clayton, first-team All-American. Alex Condon, third-team All-SEC. Both guys are projected draft picks. Both guys are top 15 nationally in Evan Maya's player ratings. This is a team that is really good, and I haven't even talked a lot about their defense, which is also really good. Holding opponents to just over 29% from beyond the arc, which is 5th nationally, just over 36% from inside the arc, 2nd nationally. They have great rim protection, as you would expect with all of that size. I think a great example of that rim protection is early in the season, back in January, they blew out Tennessee. They held the Vols to just 43 points. And that's a Tennessee team that's playing this weekend in the Sweet 16. They got a big date with Kentucky. But they held Tennessee to just 6 of 16 at the rim. Florida blocked 5 shots in that game. This is a team that can really D you up. You got to be creative finishers. You got to be able to take contact. You got to be able to play physically. This is a Florida team that does a lot right. Now, what don't they do well? Like I said, I don't see a fatal flaw with this team. I don't see something obvious where I'm like, if you can just do this, you're going to beat them. But what I thought UConn did really well, and we saw Tennessee do it, is play a low possession game. I don't think a shootout is what you want to do against Florida. I think a low possession game against a talented team, when you're trying to pull an upset, can certainly make a lot of sense. Now, I don't know that Maryland necessarily wants to do that or can do it, because that's not necessarily Maryland's game. Maryland goes fast. I mean, Maryland likes to get up and down the court. They like to go fast. They played some slower paced games. They're a good defensive team, but I don't know that it's in Maryland's best interest to always just hold the ball, run the shot clock down, and burn clock. Right? I don't know if you're Maryland, if you want to take yourself out of your element to just slow this game down. But that is something that we've seen be effective against Florida. Tennessee's done it. UConn did a really nice job of it in that upset bid against them in the second round. Something else we've seen a little bit of in that UConn game, certainly, was that they struggled a little bit with some of UConn's off-the-ball stuff, their off-the-ball screens. Now, UConn's great at that. Dan Hurley, one of the best in the country at scheming that stuff up. And I thought UConn was able to scheme up a lot of open looks, especially from three in that game. Now, UConn didn't hit all those open looks, and I think if they did, we might be talking about a Maryland-UConn matchup. We might be talking about UConn still trying to go for three in a row because UConn was right in that game. UConn had a lead deep into the second half of that game. There was a point where it felt like everything was going UConn's way, but ultimately they just go 8 of 29 from beyond the arc, and I thought they got a lot of open looks from beyond the arc, and I think a lot of that you can attribute to Florida struggling with their off-ball stuff, struggling with communication on the defensive end there. UConn got the looks. They just didn't always hit them. And I think if UConn maybe goes 34% from beyond the arc, you're talking about a completely different story. You're talking about a completely different game. And I think you're talking about a UConn win. Now, that's not what Maryland does best either. But if you're looking for a player to break out, running some catch and shoot stuff for Rodney Rice, if they can get him open and he can hit some shots, that could be huge. And we saw Rodney Rice have a really nice game against Colorado State. Rodney Rice had been a little bit cold since that big game against Illinois in the Big Ten tournament quarterfinal. Well, he hit some huge shots against Colorado State on Sunday afternoon. They don't win that game without Rodney Rice. So if you're looking for a player on Maryland that you could scheme some stuff up for, some off-the-ball stuff, get him open for some catch-and-shoot threes, it's Rodney Rice. It's certainly Selton Miguel. Those are two guys that I think will need to have big days if Maryland has a chance to pull this upset bid against Florida. What else could Maryland possibly take advantage of? Well, I don't know if this is something Maryland can take advantage of, but it's something that Maryland has to do. They absolutely have to win the turnover battle. Because when Florida wins the turnover battle, they're just too good. When Florida forces turnovers and gets out on the run, they are deadly in that transition game. So it's something that Maryland is going to really have to limit. You look at some of the games that they've lost this year. In 3 of Florida's 4 losses, they lost the turnover battle. So I don't think I can necessarily look at that and say, Florida doesn't do this well. No, they take care of the basketball. UConn did a nice job of forcing some turnovers. I definitely saw that. But it's something I say Maryland has to win that battle if they want to stay in the game. Because they cannot allow Florida the opportunity to get out in transition. Now, if you're looking for other things where Florida potentially struggles, they do struggle a bit with letting other teams get to the free throw line. In a loss to Georgia, the Dogs got to the line 27 times, and maybe that's something Maryland can exploit. When I think about the matchup inside, I think that's going to be one of the best matchups of this game. Alex Condon, Ruben Chinyelu, the bigs coming off the bench, and Hanlogton and Hawk, they have some really good big men. They have some really good size. But let's not sell Maryland's big short on the offensive end. We know what Derek Queen can do. We know what Julian Reese can do. So maybe that's something Maryland can take advantage of. Maybe Maryland can get those bigs into foul trouble. Maybe Derek Queen, Julian Reese can get to the line. Maybe Maryland's guards can attack the rim and get to the line. It's going to be a challenge. They are a great shot blocking team. They're a great rim protecting team. But Maryland's got to take the fight to Florida. Maryland has to take the fight to them. I don't think being passive is going to be how you're going to pull an upset like this. So that's a potential area that I see where I'm like, okay, if Maryland's going to win this game, they need to get to the free throw line. It could be with the bigs. It can be with the guards, Jacoby Gillespie getting into the lane, getting to the rack. That's one of the things I think Maryland's going to have to do. So when I look at this game overall, I see Florida as a team that is a true national championship contender. I see Florida as a team that is playing very well, survived a great test from UConn, where UConn, the back-to-back national champs, who are not quite at the same level but are still very good, came in with a great game plan, executed it, but just didn't execute enough to get the job done. I see Florida as a team that I don't view that as a negative mark against Florida playing UConn tough. You got to survive those kind of games in the NCAA tournament. That's very much what Maryland did against Colorado State. So I see this as a very good Florida team, a legitimate national contender in Florida. If Maryland's going to pull this upset, some things are going to have to go right. I talked about already, they're going to have to win the turnover battle. And Maryland might need to play a little bit more aggressively on the defensive end to make sure they are forcing turnovers. If there's the matchup that I worry about the most, it is Maryland's defense against Florida's offense. We've seen this year where Maryland has struggled against very good lead guards. Well, Walter Clayton, he's one of the best. If there's a guy you're going to worry about, it's Walter Clayton. That's a matchup that I worry about. Can Maryland lock down Walter Clayton? UConn was very, very physical out on the perimeter with Florida. Florida plays 5 out. They do a lot of dribble handoffs. UConn was very physical in those situations. Kevin Willard, a very good defensive coach. I trust in Kevin Willard to scheme something up for this Florida team. I thought UConn did a nice job of getting their hands in passing lanes and getting some deflections as well, forcing Florida to make some passes they maybe weren't quite comfortable with. That could be a route for Maryland, but Maryland might have to play a little bit more aggressively, take a little bit more chances in order to force those turnovers, get out on the break, and win that battle. Maryland's got to win the turnover battle, and I think Maryland's got to win the fast break points battle as well. And Maryland really has to. I don't know exactly how you do this. It's tough to do, but Maryland has to get out in transition themselves and not let Florida get out in transition, because it can be very easy just getting an up and down game where you're going back and forth. Both teams are getting a lot of transition opportunities. Maryland needs to get out in transition. I truly believe that's when Maryland's at its best, is when they are getting out in transition. I believe that's when the offense is at its most free-flowing. Maryland's very good on the break. They make good decisions, but they have to stop Florida from doing the same, and it's going to be a big challenge. They have to stay even on the offensive boards. That's been a struggle for Maryland, both against Michigan in the Big Ten tournament and against Colorado State. They were beaten on the offensive glass. They got to stay even against Florida. You can't just get completely dominated in that battle, because it's going to give Florida too many chances to get extra points. When you want to pull an upset like this, you got to play at your best, and that means rebounding the ball. And of course, Maryland's going to have to hit some shots from outside. UConn did a nice job with those off-the-ball screens. Can Maryland do the same to get Rodney Rice catch and shoot threes, to get Selton Miguel catch and shoot threes? That could be a big factor in this game. They could be X factors. If they can get hot beyond the arc, that's a way Maryland pulls the upset. So ultimately, Maryland's going to need some things to go right. It's not impossible by any means, but I do view Florida, this Florida team, as a legit national title contender, and it's going to take Maryland's best effort in order to win this ball game. All right, let's talk about one more topic, a topic I'd rather not talk about today. But what is the latest with the Kevin Willard situation? As of this moment, as I'm recording, Villanova has still not filled their job opening. And Kevin Willard went on the radio with Kevin Sheehan today on the Team 980 locally in DC, talked about a lot of things, but also talked about whether he would be staying or not. Kevin Sheehan pushed him on it a couple times on whether he would be staying. And, at best he said, I'm here for now, or let me find his exact quote there. I want to just make sure I get this right, what he actually said. As of right now, I'm staying, was his quote. And this situation, to me, I don't know if Kevin Willard is going to stay or go. I don't know exactly what he's asking for. He's talked about wanting more resources for the basketball program, and I think anybody who supports Maryland basketball probably be in support of that, but I don't know the specifics. Nobody knows the specifics except for people involved in the negotiation. I don't know who should get credit or blame if he does decide to stay, or if he does ultimately end up going to Villanova. I just know two things. One, this is an incredibly frustrating situation as somebody who would simply like to enjoy a great season from this team. One of my favorite Maryland teams to watch of all time. And instead of just thinking about this Florida game, talking about this Florida game, I am talking to people about whether Kevin Willard is going to be in College Park next year or not. I am talking to people about whether Kevin Willard is getting enough resources or why he may have disagreements with certain people in the athletic department, or if it was better or worse that Damon Evans decided to leave Maryland for SMU. All of these are conversations, all of these are topics that I think any fan would prefer not to be having leading up to a Sweet 16 game, the first Sweet 16 game since 2016. This should be a time that Maryland fans can simply celebrate, can simply enjoy this basketball program, this team, what they've accomplished, and look forward to a really big game, one of the biggest games of the post-Gary Williams era. But instead, it's discussion and chatter about whether the coach will be here or not, which brings me to my second point. You kind of expect this when you're somebody like a McNeese State who makes a run. Their coach, Will Wade, ultimately ends up going to NC State, taking the head job there. You expect this to some extent when you're a school like Drake. Ben McCollum leads them to a great season. They go to the NCAA tournament. They get a first-round win. He becomes the head coach at Iowa. It's kind of par for the course when you root for a mid-major. It's par for the course when you root for a Cinderella. It shouldn't be par for the course at Maryland. Again, I don't know the specifics of the situation. I don't know what Kevin Willard is asking for. I get that Villanova doesn't have to support football. But what I just keep coming back to is when Maryland made the decision to go to the Big Ten, it was because the Big Ten was the future. The Big Ten was going to allow them to generate enough revenue to be nationally competitive in everything. The Big Ten decision was all about money. Don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. The decision to go to the Big Ten was all about money. Maryland threw away every shred of tradition it had by leaving a conference that it was a charter member of to go and get more money from the Big Ten. And hey, that's how the game is played. I'm not lamenting not being in the ACC. I'm long past that. The ACC that I knew and I grew up with is long dead. But the reason that Maryland went to the Big Ten was so they could field nationally competitive programs across the board because they were going to get enough money to do so. And if you end up losing your basketball coach, your men's basketball coach, to a school in the Big East that generates a fraction of the revenue of the Big Ten, what are we doing here? What are we doing as an athletic department? Why is this able to happen, and why did you go to the Big Ten? So I don't have any details on Kevin Willard. I don't know if he's staying or going. I don't know who's to blame if he leaves. I don't know who's to credit if he comes back. All I know is that it's incredibly frustrating that this has to be a topic of conversation right now, and it would be incredibly frustrating to me if Maryland is not able to retain Kevin Willard because of a lack of resources when you made a earth-shattering decision, a foundational move within the past 15 years so you could have more resources. That's my thoughts on the matter, but I'd much rather focus on this game, and I will be back after this Florida game. I'll be going live on Thursday night whenever the game ends to react to it all. Win or lose, I will be there to react. That's the show for today. Until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.